So very, very interesting. You go through the kind of organisational chart and it's all pretty standard there. I bossed up 321 people, almost all of them Americans, and that was just in the operations branch of a 1,000-man strong headquarters. The teams come all the way through, right down to the smallest team, and I guess my smallest team were my personal protection people and the guys, the Australians who worked directly for me. As you can see from that picture, that's me in the front. I've been practicing my steely gaze for years and years and years, looking for an excuse to use it, and I finally found one. But the guys with the pixelated faces there are Australian Special Forces, and I had 12 people in my bodyguard. 8 of them Americans, 4 of them Australians. I don't know whether you know, but Australian Special Forces come in 2 types. They come in pixelated faces or blacked out faces. And I prefer the pixelated faces. But as you can see, I'm carrying a rifle, and for a general to carry a rifle for a real gunfighter is a terrifying thought. The 4 guys who were my bodyguard, who are superb soldiers, found this quite disturbing. And I carried a pistol as well. You can see the pistol stuck up on my chest there behind the web belt. But that was just an office accessory. You know, in fact, it's a great form of, it changes the whole dynamic of leadership in an office when everyone's armed. But as you can see, whenever we went out all the time. And in the time that for the year I was in Iraq, we were attacked 15 times, that little group there. And 3 of them were pretty serious attacks, and it kind of changes the idea of a peaceful day in the office. But my bodyguard used to practice continually in what they're doing and how they do it. They'd do their drills each and every day, and they'd rehearse. And they had 4 armoured vehicles, and the Americans drove 2 of them, and the Australians drove the other 2. And they said, listen, sir, we don't mind you carrying a rifle. It does worry us a little bit. And I used to be a very good shot, I've got to say, when I was a young officer, but I couldn't use a pistol to save myself. So if things were bad, I wanted a rifle in my hands. And they said, it's our job when things go bad to get you out. And if and when we're attacked, we'll get you out there. And if things are going really well, we'll let you fire a few shots. And I got to say, I thought that was a pretty good deal. But that's the group that I lived with, and we lived, we lived intimately together. And at the end of it, I didn't realise it, but at the end of it, we were still friends, and we still had great respect for each other. And I never thought about it at the time that I was there, but I thought if nothing else, that is significant. But this is the time of digital cameras. Everyone had a digital camera. And the digital camera was actually strapped. People would strap a digital camera onto the front of the dashboard of every vehicle they had, looking for the money shot out of Vietnam. And this is one of them.
What's the VW?
Got it.
God damn it. There's more coming. More.
And there was more coming, and it's interesting to note that for all the practice they did, when the poo hit the proverbial fan, it was go, go, go and watch the V-dub. But in everything that leaders do, whether it's the big things to do with a war or the small things to do with your personal life, it comes down to choice. If you don't have a choice, you're not a leader. You're just a robot or something. How should leaders choose? Well, the answer is obviously ethically in everything that they do. And hanging around with my philosopher mates, they tell me that this great and famous philosophical question, what ought one to do, is the kind of thing that has challenged humans' minds for several thousands of years. And it's interesting in that whenever we use it, we keep it in that form. It's a very old-fashioned form. What should one do? It takes us back to the fact that people have been addressing this lesson for thousands of years in Western civilization. What ought one to do? It's not what I should do or what you should do. It's what everyone and anyone should do. And of course, it does involve doing things. Ethics is all about doing things. If you don't have choice, you can't be blamed for choosing unethically. And when you do, you've got to go to the areas of what is good and what is right. And in our kind of deciding what that is, we want to mix up in some way values and principles. And I've always found that those lists there interesting. When you think about your values can change. If you said to an American on the day before 9/11, what is the value of the American nation? I'll bet they would have said liberty. If you asked them the day after 9/11, what's the real value of, what is the real thing that Americans are all about? They would have said, well, it was liberty, but we're prepared to trade a bit of that off for a bit more security. And if you'd spoken to the Chinese, you might have said to the Chinese, what's the real value that Chinese live by? They would have probably said harmony over many years. Nowadays, they may have changed it a bit, and they might be prepared to trade off a bit of harmony for a bit of prosperity. And those kind of things go. But when you get to the principles are things that should never change. If you can crack your principles, you're right. And the three that are there are interesting. The golden rule, do unto others. I mean, it's pretty good. We learn more about leaders by looking at bad bosses, in my view, than any other technique. The sunlight test, would you be happy that this was exposed to this in the sunlight for everyone to see? You know, would you like your mum to see what you're doing? And a conscience, of course. Every choice that we make should be done on the basis of an informed conscience. It's not only the big issues, it's the small issues as well as the big issues, the interpersonal relationships. To take that same approach down to your relationship with all of those people that are listed there, and even to your enemies. And of course, even in the military, in a war, you don't have the unrestricted right to kill and kill and kill. Everything is controlled. And I mean, I don't need the laws of armed conflict to tell me what is right. As an Australian, as an army officer, as someone with Christian values, I can make certain ethical choices. But a lot of people in our society can't. And I'm sure, you know, young kids will come up through the system who have not yet settled down on their moral compass. And leaders can provide that guidance to people like that. It gets down to personal characteristics. If you're polite, if you're considerate, if you're confident, among lots of other things, then of course people will be very happy to work for you. These are really the two kind of tips that I'd like to give you. Now, I made the second one up, Constructive Paranoia, because I was involved in a big battle called the Battle of Fallujah. And it was my job to prepare the area of Fallujah for the fact that we knew we would have to conduct a conventional attack on it. And I worked my guys to death getting to the start line where we handed the responsibility of the city over to the US Marines. And the boys and girls said, for crying out loud, sir, relax. And it ain't my job to relax. It's my job to be constructively paranoid. I knew that there are a lot of people out there who are out to get me. And if you take that attitude, if it's constructive, then you'll work the details. I mean, we look around and we see example after example where a brilliant policy is failing in the implementation. And invariably, it's due to the fact that people didn't grasp up the details. The one above it comes really from the St James Ethics Centre, and I think it's a great thing. It's a thing I've been thinking about, constructive subversion. When things go wrong, you say, how in God's name did we get ourselves into that situation? Someone will say, we've always been doing it that way, sir. We've always. Unthinking custom and practice. And if you can find someone in your organisation who is prepared to constructively subvert the organisation, then they're worth their weight in gold. The irony is that that kind of person is normally a very, very difficult person to deal with. And you've got to differentiate between the person who is disruptive, and we all know that they exist, and the person who is trying to constructively subvert, who come up to you and say, boss, let's have a look at this, you know. if we do it this way, I'm really concerned that we're going to do such and such. Someone who will constructively make suggestions. Let me give you 2 practical examples to finish on. They're extreme examples, and they both come from the Vietnam War. And they are to do with the My Lai massacre. Now, my generation knows what the My Lai massacre is. I keep forgetting that many in the audience don't. 1968 in Vietnam, a group of 100 or so American soldiers conducted the most appalling massacre that you could ever imagine. It became known the year after. They killed between 300 to 500 civilians, women and children. They didn't just kill them, they did the awful things that are listed up there on the slides. 26 of those 100 soldiers were charged, but only one was convicted, Lieutenant William Kelly, and he was subsequently pardoned. And that's a whole other story in itself. It's an extraordinary example of ethics because it goes to every reason why leadership fails. And the consequences of this very low-level action by 100 or so people when there were 500,000 American soldiers in Vietnam at the time was appalling because it went straight to the strategic reason for being there. The criticism that everyone was making was that you're in Vietnam to kill babies. You're not in Vietnam to save the Vietnamese or whatever the justification might have been. It went to the very reason why that army existed. And you can always find people who will make mistakes, and those mistakes will then go up and threaten the entire organisation. It's also fascinating to note that 3 people of those 100 or so did not do it. 3 people. This was not an extraordinarily bad group of Americans. This could happen at different levels of appallingness in any organisation. And it's fascinating that there was one helicopter pilot who happened to be flying over the area where the Americans were putting these people into a ditch and firing into them. He saw this and he comes up on the radio and he says, "What are you guys doing? What are you guys doing?" He finally landed between the American shooting and the Vietnamese in the ditch. So the appallingness of My Lai is balanced by really heroic actions by a number of people. The tragedy, of course, is for the Vietnamese. Let me run 2 clips for you. First one is a soldier who did the killing and the impact of unethical behaviour when he was a kid in 1968. This is about 10, 15 years old, this video. Is just awful on this person. If you act unethically, wrongly at any stage of your career, it's going to impact forever. Let me run this video for you. See, what a tragedy. He is still 20 years after the excuse making excuses, 20 years after the event making excuses for his own activity. The program bit of killing, everyone was doing it. The consequences, if you fiddle the books or anything like that, the consequences of unethical behaviour are illustrated by this fellow. You might have noticed a small picture of a kid next to him as he was talking. You know, life is tough. That was his son. His son was killed in a totally arbitrary and unconnected drive-by shooting on the front lawn of his house. And he killed himself sometime after that interview. The consequences of unethical actions just go on and on and on. Lost all sense of direction or purpose. That's what we can provide. We can provide. That's not a failure of an individual. He is a low capacity, probably, individual. We as leaders can provide that to him, that direction. And it's not just soldiers. Let's go back and look at the global financial crisis and see how the little errors became enormous errors which have the potential to change Western civilization. This is a guy who didn't. And for every group of 100 Americans who did something like that, all the other groups didn't because they were led. Because if those tendencies ever came in, they were led out of them. Everyone knows that it's wrong to kill women and children. Of course it is. Everyone knows it's wrong to take money out of this area and put it into that area. Everyone knows it's wrong to abuse credit cards. All of these kind of things start off low and the consequences are just appalling. Folks, I guess I've covered a very big canvas. This is pretty well what I said I would do to begin with. These are the themes that I spoke about initially. I still think that the ultimate expression of leadership is the overall direction that we give to our people. And as a military guy, you'd expect me to quote a dead German general because they said some amazing things. This one is so true. Strategy without tactics is the slow road to victory. So if you've got the right strategy, but you're not too sure how to do it, you might get to victory, but it'll take you a long time. But tactics without strategy is noise before defeat. You could be the best health industry in the world, but if you're doing it in the wrong place at the wrong time for the wrong reason, you're going to fail. We as leaders can provide that central direction. Thank you very, very much.